My wife said, "Your masculinity is toxic," so I became the evolved man she demanded, pretended to be perfect, and let everything in our life slowly fall apart until she finally begged me to come back as the real me she tried to push away. My wife called me toxic at a family barbecue. In front of everyone. Her words hit me like a physical blow, right as I was holding a plate of ribs I'd spent hours perfecting. But instead of defending myself, a chilling plan formed in my mind. I would give her exactly the progressive, evolved man she demanded, no matter the cost to us both. The May afternoon was perfect, a warm Saturday in my parents' backyard, the air thick with charcoal smoke and the scent of Carol's famous potato salad. People I loved surrounded me, their laughter a comfortable backdrop. For 32 years, Ethan, thought I was doing everything right as a husband. I changed the oil in both our cars, no questions asked. The garbage disposal? Fixed at 2 a.m. the moment it made that grinding noise. I carried every heavy grocery bag from the car to the kitchen because Olivia had a bad back from an old incident. I worked 50-hour weeks as a project manager so she could pursue her passion for graphic design without the pressure of being the primary breadwinner. My dad, David, raised me to believe a man showed up, provided, protected, and never complained. My mom, Carol, taught me actions speak louder than words, that real love is demonstrated through sacrifice. I genuinely believed Olivia appreciated all of this. She married me, after all. She'd smile when I fixed things, thank me for handling the finances. She never once complained about my approach. This Saturday started just like any other weekend there. Dad was at the grill, focused and intense. Mom arranged her potato salad. Olivia's sister, Chloe, had driven down from Austin with her new boyfriend, who seemed nice enough but kept checking his phone. The backyard smelled like home, safe and nostalgic. Olivia seemed relaxed, laughing at something Chloe said, sipping wine in the late afternoon sun. I remembered thinking how beautiful she looked in that yellow sundress, genuinely grateful for the life we'd built. Then dinner began. About 20 minutes in, right after Dad finished his story about accidentally locking himself in the shed, Olivia suddenly stood up. She tapped her wine glass with her fork, like at a wedding when they want a kiss. Everyone went quiet. I thought maybe she was announcing something exciting, pregnant, or a big client win for her design work. Instead, she cleared her throat. "I want to share something important with everyone who matters most to me." My stomach dropped before she even started. Her tone had this rehearsed quality, like she'd practiced it. "I've been doing a lot of reading lately about relationship dynamics and gender roles," she began, "and I've come to realize something really important about our marriage." That sudden exclamation in her voice should have been my first warning. She continued, explaining she'd been reflecting on how traditional masculinity shows up in our relationship, and how much of what we consider normal is actually rooted in patriarchal structures that limit both of us. I watched Dad's face go blank, that look he gets when trying to process something that just doesn't compute. Mom stopped chewing mid-bite. Chloe's boyfriend suddenly found his coleslaw fascinating. Olivia kept going. "Ethan embodies a lot of toxic masculine traits, and I think it's time we acknowledge that so he can evolve into a more emotionally available and progressive partner." The word toxic hung in the air like smoke. She listed examples. My insistence on driving on long trips denied her agency. Handling all finances infantilized her. Fixing things around the house without asking if she wanted to learn robbed her of growth opportunities. Making decisions about home security and maintenance without consulting her was controlling behavior. Every single thing I thought made me a good husband was being reframed as evidence of my problematic nature. I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. Dad's fork scraped against his plate. In the silence, Chloe looked mortified, staring down like she wished she could disappear. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to point out Olivia had never once complained, that she'd actively encouraged me to handle finances because she hated budgets, that she'd thanked me just last week for fixing the leaky faucet she'd been complaining about for days. But something stopped me. In that moment, a clarity of vision hit me. Arguing would be pointless. Olivia hadn't reached this conclusion through logic or observation. She'd absorbed it from somewhere else. Her online communities, her new therapist, those podcasts she'd been binging. No amount of rational discussion was going to change her mind, because this wasn't really about me. It was about her need to be seen as progressive, enlightened. So, instead of defending myself, instead of getting angry or hurt, or walking away, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I set down my fork very carefully, looked directly at Olivia, and smiled. Not a fake smile, not a bitter one, but a genuine smile that probably looked unsettling given the circumstances. I said, "You know what? You're absolutely right." My voice was calm, almost cheerful. Confusion flashed across Olivia's face. This clearly wasn't the reaction she'd expected. I told her I'd been operating under outdated assumptions about what marriage should look like, and that I appreciated her brave honesty in calling me out. I said I was committed to evolving into the kind of partner she deserved. Someone who rejected traditional masculine roles and embraced true equality in every aspect of our relationship. Dad made a noise that might have been a cough or a strangled protest. Mom reached over, grabbed his hand, as if physically stopping him from speaking. Olivia's expression shifted from surprise to pleased, like she'd just won an argument she didn't know she was having. She sat back down, squeezed my hand across the table, told me she was proud of me for being so receptive, and said this was the beginning of a better chapter. Chloe looked relieved the awkward moment had passed. The rest of dinner continued with forced normalcy, but I barely tasted my food. Inside my head, a plan was forming, cold and clear as ice water. If Olivia wanted me to stop being traditionally masculine, if she wanted true equality without any of those protective instincts or provider behaviors she just labeled as toxic, then that's exactly what she was going to get. Not halfway, not partially, but completely and absolutely. I was going to give her the evolved man she demanded, and I was going to do it so thoroughly, so precisely, that she'd understand exactly what she just asked for. On the drive home, Olivia talked excitedly about this being a breakthrough moment for our marriage, how she'd worried I'd react defensively. I kept my eyes on the road, made agreeable noises, while mentally cataloging every single thing I did in our daily life that she'd just categorized as problematic. It was a longer list than I'd realized. When we got home, I told her that starting tomorrow, I was implementing immediate changes to ensure I respected her full autonomy and agency. She kissed my cheek, said she loved me, completely missing the edge in my voice. That night, while she slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about the garbage disposal I'd fixed, the tire I'd changed in the rain last month, the spiders I'd removed from the bathroom, the bills I'd organized, the security system I'd installed, the gutters I'd cleaned, the flat tire I'd changed on her car last winter at midnight. Every single act of service I thought demonstrated love was apparently just evidence of my toxic need to control and protect. Fine, I thought. Let's see how long love survives without any of that foundation. She didn't know it yet, but Olivia had just dismantled our entire marriage with one speech. And tomorrow morning, I was going to stand back and let her watch it collapse. The evolution began the next morning at 6:30. My alarm went off, and I did something I'd never done in 7 years of marriage. I got up, made myself a single cup of coffee in my travel mug, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door for work without making Olivia's usual cappuccino. It sounds petty, I know, but that cappuccino had been part of our morning routine since we moved in together. Something I did automatically while she showered, timed perfectly so it was still hot when she came downstairs. That morning, she came down in her bathrobe expecting to find it waiting, and instead found nothing. I was already gone. She texted me around 8, asking if everything was okay. I replied that everything was great. I was just respecting her autonomy by not assuming she needed me to make her coffee, like she couldn't handle basic tasks herself. She sent back a confused emoji but didn't push it. That was Monday. By Wednesday, the small changes had started to pile up in ways that created friction neither of us acknowledged directly. Our garbage disposal had been making a weird rattling noise for 2 days, the kind of sound that meant something was stuck in the blades. Probably a piece of silverware. Normally, I would have already fixed it, but when Olivia mentioned it, I told her I had complete faith in her ability to troubleshoot mechanical issues and that I didn't want to rob her of the learning opportunity. She stared at me for a long moment, then said she'd look up a YouTube tutorial. 3 days later, the disposal was still rattling because she never got around to watching the video. The dog food situation became an issue on Thursday. We had a 70-pound German Shepherd named Buster who went through a 40-pound bag of kibble every 3 weeks. I always kept the bag in the garage and filled his bowl twice a day, because lifting that bag required some muscle and Olivia had that bad back I mentioned. Thursday evening, she went to feed Buster and found his container empty. The new bag was sitting in the trunk of my car where I'd left it after going to the pet store. She asked me to bring it in, and I explained very pleasantly that I was working on not automatically assuming physical tasks were my responsibility, that carrying heavy objects was something any capable adult could manage with proper lifting technique, and that I believed in her strength. Olivia's face did this thing where her jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. She tried to lift the bag herself, struggled for a solid minute, then ended up dragging it across the garage floor and leaving it there. Buster ate half portions for 2 days until I finally brought it inside. Not because she asked, but because I felt bad for the dog. The washing machine incident happened the following week, and this is where things started to shift from annoying to actually problematic. Our washer is one of those high-efficiency front loaders that occasionally gets mold buildup if you don't clean the rubber seal, and it had started to smell like mildew. Olivia asked if I could take a look. I reminded her that household maintenance was a shared responsibility and that I trusted her judgment on how to handle it. She got frustrated and said she didn't know anything about washing machine maintenance. I suggested she could Google it or call a repair person, that I was trying not to be the kind of husband who treated her like she was incapable of problem solving. The machine kept smelling worse, and our clothes started coming out with a sour odor. She eventually called a repair guy who charged us $200 to do what I could have done in 15 minutes with some bleach and a rag. Olivia didn't speak to me for the rest of that evening. The grocery situation became a weekly nightmare. I had always done the shopping because I left work earlier than Olivia, and the store was on my way home. Plus, I was better at meal planning and sticking to a budget. Now, I only bought food for myself, carefully calculating portions and leaving her to handle her own nutrition. The first week, she didn't realize what was happening until she went to make dinner and discovered we had ingredients for exactly one meal. She asked where everything else was, and I explained that I was practicing not making unilateral decisions about household needs, that buying food for both of us without consultation was presumptuous and controlling. Olivia ordered takeout that night, and I could see her mentally calculating how much this new arrangement was going to cost. Our friends started noticing the change at a barbecue we hosted 3 weeks into my evolution. My buddy Michael and his wife brought over their new patio furniture set that they wanted to assemble in our backyard, one of those complicated 8-piece deals with cushions and a table. Michael naturally asked if I could help him carry the boxes from his truck. I politely declined, saying I was working on not perpetuating stereotypes about men always handling physical labor. Everyone kind of laughed awkwardly, thinking I was joking, until they realized I was serious. Michael and his wife ended up struggling with the boxes themselves while I sat on our deck drinking a beer. Olivia's face turned red, but she couldn't say anything without contradicting her own speech about toxic masculinity. Later that evening, after everyone left, she said I was being deliberately unhelpful. I asked her very calmly what part of respecting equality and rejecting traditional gender roles she wanted me to stop doing. She didn't have an answer. The car situation is what finally scared her. It was a rainy morning in late June, and Olivia's Honda wouldn't start, just made that clicking sound that usually means a dead battery. She called me from the driveway, clearly expecting me to come out and either jump it or figure out the problem. I was in the middle of my morning coffee. I told her that car trouble was stressful and I had confidence she could handle it, that calling AAA or watching a YouTube video on jump-starting would be a great growth opportunity. Her voice got sharp. She said she was going to be late for a client meeting. I reminded her that I was working on not rushing to solve her problems like she was incapable, that this was exactly the kind of protective behavior she'd identified as toxic. She hung up on me. I watched from the kitchen window as she stood in the rain, trying to figure out the hood latch, then gave up and called an Uber that cost her $45. I jump-started her car that evening in about 3 minutes. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Olivia was coming home late from meeting with a client downtown. She called me around 9 p.m., her voice shaking. She said there was a guy following her from the parking garage to her car and she was scared. My old instinct was to tell her to stay on the phone, to get to a populated area, to scream if he got too close, maybe even drive over there myself. Instead, I said very calmly that I trusted her judgment in handling the situation, that she was a strong, independent woman who didn't need a man to feel safe. I added that calling the police or building security would be more effective than relying on outdated damsel-in-distress dynamics. She made us sound like she'd been slapped. The line went dead. She didn't answer when I called back. 20 minutes later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked past me without speaking, went straight upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door lock. The next morning, she came downstairs. Her eyes were puffy like she'd been crying. She said she couldn't do this anymore, that the house was falling apart, everything was harder than it needed to be, and she felt completely alone despite being married. I asked her what specifically she wanted me to change. She struggled to articulate it, because doing so would mean admitting that all those traditional masculine behaviors she'd called toxic were actually things she needed. She finally said, "I want my husband back." Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked at her very carefully and asked, "Which one?" She went quiet. She understood what I meant. Did she want the husband who fixed things, carried heavy bags, made her coffee, and protected her? Or did she want the evolved, progressive partner who treated her like a fully autonomous adult who didn't need any of that? She couldn't have both, and we both knew it. She whispered that she didn't know. I told her to figure it out, because I was tired of being criticized for caring. The house fell into chaos over the next 2 weeks, and I watched it happen with the detachment of someone observing a controlled experiment. Dishes piled up in the sink because Olivia kept forgetting to run the dishwasher, and I no longer reminded her. The lawn grew tall enough that our neighbor left a passive-aggressive note about neighborhood standards. Buster tracked mud through the living room because nobody had fixed the loose board on the back porch that created a giant puddle when it rained. Our bedroom had boxes of Olivia's design supplies stacked against one wall because I'd always been the one to install shelving and organize storage solutions. The light bulb in the hallway burned out and stayed dark for 6 days. Every small thing I used to handle automatically became a visible absence, like removing the scaffolding from a building and watching it slowly lean. Olivia stopped eating regular meals because coordinating groceries and cooking without any system overwhelmed her after long workdays. I'd find her at 10 at night, eating cereal or crackers, looking exhausted and defeated. She lost weight, and the shadows under her eyes got darker. Her design work started suffering too, because she was too stressed and tired to meet deadlines. I watched her panic over a client presentation she'd normally nail without breaking a sweat. On a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after our conversation, she came downstairs and found me reading on the couch. She sat down on the coffee table directly in front of me, so I had to look at her, and said she needed to say something. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking. She told me she'd been wrong, completely and stupidly wrong, and that the speech she'd made at my parents' house was the dumbest thing she'd ever done. She said she'd been spending too much time in online communities where women competed to see who could be the most progressive and critical of their partners, where every act of traditional masculinity got labeled as problematic regardless of context or intent. She admitted she'd felt pressure to perform wokeness, to prove she wasn't some suburban housewife who needed a man, and in trying to score points with strangers on the internet, she'd dismantled the actual good marriage she had with someone who genuinely loved her. She said, "Your masculinity was never toxic. It was protective. And I'm sorry I couldn't see that until it was gone." The tears started then, and they weren't manipulative tears. They were the kind that come from real recognition of a mistake. I closed my book and let her talk. She continued, saying she'd called her therapist and realized that most of what she'd been reading online was performative nonsense that didn't account for real relationships with real people who had different strengths and preferences. She said she didn't want a gender-neutral roommate. She wanted her husband back, the one who gave a damn about her well-being, even if it meant doing things she could technically do herself. She acknowledged that there was a difference between controlling behavior and caring behavior, between infantilizing someone and simply loving them enough to make their life easier. I sat there for a long moment, because this was the crossroads. What I said next would determine whether we had a marriage worth saving. I told her very clearly that I would never again be publicly humiliated for being the kind of man my father taught me to be. I said if she wanted me back, then she needed to understand that I was going to fix things and carry heavy bags and make her coffee and handle the finances and protect her. Not because I thought she was incapable, but because that's how I showed love, and I wasn't going to apologize for it anymore. I told her she could either accept that this was who I was and appreciate it, or I would help her pack and we could go our separate ways. But I was done walking on eggshells in my own marriage. Olivia nodded and said she understood. Then she asked what she could do to fix this. I told her there was one thing. 3 days later, we were back at my parents' house for dinner. I could see the tension in Dad's shoulders when we walked in, like he was bracing for another awkward speech. Mom hugged us both, but her smile was cautious. We sat down to eat, and about halfway through the meal, Olivia stood up and tapped her glass exactly like she'd done before. The entire table went silent, and I saw Dad's jaw clench. Olivia's hands were shaking, but her voice was clear when she spoke. She said, "A few weeks ago, I stood here and said some things about Ethan that I need to publicly correct." She explained that she'd accused him of toxic masculinity when the truth was that everything he did came from a place of love and partnership. She said she'd been influenced by social media narratives that painted traditional male behavior as inherently problematic without acknowledging context or intention. She told my parents that their son was the best man she knew, that he'd spent our entire marriage making her life better in countless ways she'd taken for granted, and that she was grateful every single day that he'd chosen to be patient with her while she figured out what actually mattered. She said, "Ethan isn't toxic. He's exactly the kind of husband any woman should hope for, and I'm sorry I didn't say that the first time." Mom started crying immediately. Dad's whole face softened in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. He reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder without saying anything, because he didn't need to. After dinner, I fixed the garbage disposal that had been rattling, carried in Buster's food without being asked, and made Olivia her cappuccino the next morning. She watched me do these things with a different expression than before, not entitlement, but genuine appreciation. 2 weeks later, Olivia asked if she could post something on her Instagram. She showed me the draft before publishing. It was a photo of us from our wedding and a long caption about how she'd almost destroyed her marriage by confusing strength with toxicity and partnership with oppression. She wrote about learning the difference between a man who controls you and a man who protects you, between someone who infantilizes you and someone who simply loves you enough to make your life easier. The post got hundreds of comments, mostly from women sharing similar realizations about their own relationships. Some criticized her for being anti-feminist, but plenty more thanked her for saying what they'd been afraid to admit. Things aren't perfect now, because marriage never is, but they're real. Olivia thanks me when I fix things, and I thank her when she does the emotional labor I'm not naturally good at. We're building something honest instead of performing for an invisible audience of people who don't actually care about our happiness. I learned something important through all of this. Something I wish I'd understood earlier. The strongest thing you can sometimes do in a relationship isn't to fight or argue or explain. It's to step back and let someone experience the full weight of what they're asking for. Olivia didn't need a lecture about why she was wrong. She needed to live in the absence of everything she'd taken for granted. Sometimes the only way to make someone appreciate what they have is to let them lose it, even temporarily, even when it hurts you both. My masculinity was never the problem, and her need for independence was never really about independence. The problem was gratitude, or the lack of it. And sometimes you have to take everything off the table before someone realizes what was actually there all along. What would you have done in my shoes?